In my last video, I talked about building either a four-way or a three-way, and even before I published that video, I came to the conclusion that it had to be a four-way, so I settled on that. And I worked to that end by bringing that thing that I made, that quickly mocked up Baffle down here, putting the speakers in, and that includes the 15-inch woofer, the 8-inch mid-woofer, a 4-inch mid-range, and a 1-inch dome tweeter. And in order to try it out without building a crossover, I hooked it up to a Behringer electronic crossover that I have. This particular model can handle a mono four-way or a stereo pair three-way. And that's what I was using it for before with my old three-ways after the digital one that I had stopped working. Also in that last video, I talked about potential crossover points, and that was a rough guess on my part. The only real way to arrive at the actual crossover points is to get the drivers installed, get them tested, hook it up to the electronic crossover, dial it in that way to get the smoothest response possible from the four drivers together. And that's what I did. Like immediately I went with those crossover points to begin with and adjusted from there. And something that I did differently here than you would normally do when you're setting up a speaker like this is that I have the opportunity to actually put the microphone in the listening position to see the best overall response from that position. So I did that. I set the microphone there and I ran a bunch of measurements. The first one is at 200 between the woofer and the mid-woofer, 1000 hertz between the mid-woofer and the mid-range, and 3500 hertz between the mid-range and the tweeter. And to be honest, that looked pretty good, but I've got the thing so I can move everything up and down and check it and see if I can find something that's better. And that's what I did next. So I started with the woofer and lifted that crossover point up to 300. Then I lowered it down to 150 to see what it looks like there. And working with the mid-woofer that I have, I left it there and started on the mid-woofer itself. Now I should point out that I'm going to replace this mid-woofer. It's actually a lot more sensitive than the other three drivers, as in I have to turn the gain down all the way on this one to get it to closely match the other three. So I've ordered two less sensitive ones that are around about the same. They're both 8-inch drivers that'll match this one. So that means at best everything I'm doing here is kind of temporary, but I had this set up and I'm listening to it, so that's important to get everything dialed in anyway. And also, you know, it's kind of interesting doing this stuff. So what I did was I moved the mid-woofer down to 600 and ran the sweep again, and you can see what that looks like. And that looked a little bit better, so I went down even further to 520 hertz and ran the sweep again, and that's what you're looking at right here. And I went down further again, but I didn't keep that measurement because there wasn't any improvement. It actually started to get worse again. So I left it at 520 and I moved on to the mid-range. I took the crossover point up from 3500 hertz to 5200 hertz, and that looked okay, but not really an improvement. So I went the other way and I brought it down to 2800 hertz. And that didn't look any better either, so I went right back up to 3500 hertz, and that's where I'm keeping that. And then I turned on the subwoofers and saw how that was integrating, and that looks pretty good, except there's a little bit too much below 20 hertz, so I added a high-pass filter at 20 hertz, and also made a 6 decibel cut at 15 hertz, and that's what you see here. From there, I made some adjustments to the subwoofer. I lifted the output, and I also changed the crossover point between the subwoofers and that woofer to 40 hertz. It was 80 hertz before. And the measurement that you're looking at here is the subwoofer, that's the red trace, and the woofer, and that's the green trace. Now, like I said, I'm replacing the mid-woofer that I have with one that's less sensitive, but here it is measured along with the woofer and the subwoofer. You can see how they're integrating. And now here it is with the mid-range, and that's one of the advantages of having an active setup. You can just unplug one of the drivers so that you can test without it. And then this next one shows the tweeter added in. This plot shows the full range response without any equalization other than that high pass filter and 6 dB cut at 15 hertz. And because some guys like to see this stuff without smoothing, I don't really see the value in that myself. Here that is if you want to look at that. So where do I go from here? Well, I got to wait for that mid-woofer to come, the new one. I ordered two for two, a stereo pair. The ones that I have here, I'm going to make another more efficient pair of speakers with those sometime down the road. So they won't go to waste. Also, I ordered another piece of gear. Generally, I don't, go in for gear that much, but this is a mini DSP digital crossover, and it will handle a stereo pair of 4 ways. It has a lot more flexibility than that Behringer unit that I have, and I'm sure the sound quality is probably a little bit better. Although I really can't complain about the sound quality of that unit at all. It sounds pretty good. Like I'm not hearing any, like too much hiss out of the speakers. There's a little tiny bit, but you got to be up close to it to hear it. And I don't sit close to that. My hearing's not great anyway. Also, it gives you the flexibility to not only pick the crossover points, but add in delay if needed. Also, add individual filters to each drivers to try to smooth out those, humps and valleys a little bit. My experimentation down here with equalizer APO has shown that the more of that you do, the more flattening of the response that you do, the less appealing the music can sound. So I've actually backed off on that quite a bit, and I'm leaving the response more natural. It actually sounds better, to my ears anyway, when you have a little bit of that, waviness and humpiness in there, like at the listening position, which would be normal for everybody that's listening to music. Maybe it's imprinted in your brain, the way that music sounds, with all that humpiness built in because you've listened to music your entire life that way. So I'm not going to go overboard with the smoothing on the new digital crossover.